It started like any other weekend morning. The sun was just rising over the calm water, and I was standing at the edge of the lake with a fishing rod in hand, enjoying the peaceful silence before the world fully woke up. I wasn't hurting anyone. No loud music, no littering, just a quiet moment to myself. A few ducks paddled by lazily, the air smelled of fresh pine, and for once, everything felt still. Then, out of nowhere, the tranquility shattered. A familiar voice screeched my name from across the park, cutting through the calm like a rusty chainsaw. It was her, Karen. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was inspecting a crime scene, she marched straight toward me like a one-woman SWAT team. I already knew what was coming. Somehow, I had broken one of her many unwritten rules that seemed to exist solely in her imagination. She stopped a few feet away, pointed at me with that dramatic finger wag, and announced with great authority that I was violating HOA policy by fishing in restricted common areas. I almost laughed. There were no signs, no barriers, nothing that said fishing was forbidden. But Karen didn't care. She had reports, apparently, and according to her, that was enough. 3 days later, I got the official letter. A fine, $200 for unauthorized recreational activity. The words looked like a joke printed on real paper. I read it 3 times, just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. But there it was, stamped, dated, and threatening further penalties if I didn't comply. That was the moment something in me snapped. I wasn't just annoyed, I was done. And that was the beginning of the most satisfying revenge I never planned to take. When we first moved into the neighborhood, the idea of an HOA didn't seem like a big deal. Sure, there were a few rules, some guidelines to keep things tidy, and a monthly fee that didn't seem too outrageous. Like most people, I skimmed through the thick packet of regulations, nodded along during the orientation meeting, and figured common sense would be enough to stay in good standing. After all, how hard could it be to follow basic community rules? But that was before I learned that the HOA wasn't just a system, it was a kingdom. And Karen was its self-declared queen. She took the title of HOA vice president more seriously than most world leaders take their oath of office. Always lurking, always watching, always armed with her clipboard, and an encyclopedia-sized knowledge of every obscure clause ever written into that bylaw book. Most of the residents ignored the rules because, honestly, they were buried in legal jargon no one had time to decipher. They trusted that as long as they mowed their lawns and didn't paint their houses neon green, they'd be fine. But Karen, she read every word, memorized them. She interpreted the vague ones however she pleased, and weaponized them against anyone who dared to live a little. Decorative garden gnome on your porch. Violation. Too many guests parked outside your home for a barbecue. Infraction. A kid's bike left temporarily on the front lawn. Warning notice. It was like living in a gated community run by a petty dictator with too much time and a thirst for control. What made it worse was how selective she was. Her friends? Exempt. Her own flower beds, which technically violated height restrictions? Never a problem. But heaven forbid someone else try to enjoy the amenities their dues helped pay for. That lake, beautiful, tranquil, the centerpiece of the neighborhood, was supposedly for everyone. At least that's what the brochure said when we bought the house. But Karen's version of everyone didn't include people who didn't fit her unwritten expectations. So while most of us ignored the rule book, she wielded it like a weapon. And when it came to the fishing incident, she didn't just quote a rule, she created one. All to make a point. A petty, pointless point. And that's when I knew something had to change. That Sunday morning had started out perfectly. My son and I had planned it all week, just the two of us, a couple of rods, some sandwiches, and hours by the lake doing nothing but fishing and talking about everything and nothing. He was 12, in that in-between stage where one moment he's a little kid asking me if dragons are real, and the next he's telling me about school drama like a miniature adult. These moments were rare, precious. No screens, no distractions. Just us and the soft ripples of the water stretching out in front of us. We set up near the willow tree, the one with branches that touched the water like they were whispering secrets to the lake. My son cast his line and let out a whoop when it plopped in just right. I remember watching him sit there, eyes full of anticipation, the early sun painting golden streaks on the water. It felt like we were in a pocket of time the world had forgotten. Birds chirped lazily overhead. The breeze was cool but not cold, and for a while it felt like life was exactly how it should be. Until the crunch of hurried footsteps broke the spell. I turned and saw her approaching. Karen, in her usual beige workout gear, sunglasses on, lips pursed like she'd smelled something foul. Even from across the lawn, I could feel her glare. My son noticed too and leaned closer to me, already sensing that the peace was about to shatter. She didn't say hello, didn't ask what we were doing. She pointed straight at the lake, then at us, and barked something about unauthorized access to private waters. It was surreal, like we'd just been caught committing a crime in broad daylight. I tried to reason with her, calmly explaining we lived in the neighborhood and had fished there before. But logic had no place in Karen's world. She talked over me, cited some vague HOA clause about regulated usage of communal property, and declared we were trespassing. My son looked confused, hurt even, like he'd done something wrong. And that's what stung the most. Not the yelling, not the absurdity, but the look on my kid's face, his special morning ruined by someone who didn't understand peace if it slapped her with a trout. That was the exact moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't going to be just another complaint brushed aside. This was war. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. It was plain, white, and official looking, with the HOA logo stamped on the corner like some kind of seal from a kingdom I never agreed to serve. I opened it without much thought, expecting another neighborhood update, or maybe a reminder about lawn maintenance. But the moment I unfolded the letter and saw the words, "Notice of Violation," my stomach dropped. According to the document, I had committed an unauthorized recreational activity in a restricted zone. The penalty? A $200 fine. $200 for fishing. For sitting quietly with my son by the lake that our HOA fees supposedly helped maintain. The letter was cold, full of formal phrases and legalese, ending with a threat of additional consequences if the fine wasn't paid within 10 business days. No warning, no discussion, just a demand. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading it with a mixture of disbelief and anger boiling in my chest. I hadn't damaged anything. I hadn't littered or disrespected the space. I'd simply shared a quiet morning with my kid, in a spot every realtor in the area bragged about when trying to sell homes. But that didn't matter. Karen had filed her report, and the HOA rubber-stamped it without a second thought. What stung even more was how impersonal it was. No one had called. No one had knocked on my door to talk it out. Just a fine, printed and delivered like a punishment from on high. I felt small, like I was being silenced over something as innocent as a fishing rod and a tackle box. And that's when the idea hit me. Not just to fight it, but to turn the tables completely. If they wanted to play games, I'd play too. Only this time, I'd make the rules. The HOA meeting was held in the usual spot, a sterile community clubhouse with fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to make you question your sanity. I walked in with a copy of the violation letter folded in my back pocket, already knowing what I was going to say. My goal wasn't to cause a scene. I just wanted someone to acknowledge how absurd the fine was, and maybe reverse it. A little logic, a little common sense. That's all I hoped for. But I forgot one important thing. Karen would be there. She was already seated at the long folding table at the front of the room, flanked by the other board members like a courtroom jury. Her expression was smug, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed into that familiar disapproving line. I signed in, took a seat, and waited for my turn to speak. They got through budget updates and landscaping complaints. Then finally, Agenda Item 6, Violations and Disputes. I stood, cleared my throat, and calmly explained what happened. I talked about the lake, the lack of signage, how my son and I had simply been fishing in peace, and how the fine felt completely out of proportion. I even offered to volunteer with the HOA to help clarify the rules for future incidents. But before I could finish, Karen cut me off. She leaned into her microphone like she was delivering a final verdict. "The rules are clear," she said flatly. "The lake is not for unsupervised fishing. It's in the handbook." I challenged her. "Page number?" I asked. She blinked, then mumbled something about amendments and interpretations. The rest of the board glanced around, clearly uncomfortable, but no one dared cross her. In the end, they voted, and to no one's surprise, the fine was upheld. I walked out feeling dismissed, like I'd just wasted my breath trying to reason with a wall. The injustice of it all, the smugness, the fake authority, the absolute unwillingness to even consider my side, fueled something in me. It wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about standing up to someone who used her position to bully people under the guise of rules. That night, I started digging. Not out of revenge, not yet, but out of curiosity. And what I found changed everything. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the meeting over and over again in my mind. The way Karen shut me down, the way the board just nodded along like trained seals, the way nobody seemed to care about how ridiculous it all was. Eventually I got up, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the dining table with my laptop. If they were going to use rules against me, I'd learn every single one. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find something they missed. I started with the HOA's publicly available documents, meeting notes, bylaws, community plans. Most of it was dry and repetitive, but something in the lake section caught my attention. The documents referred to it as adjacent recreational land and subject to external ownership agreements. That phrasing stuck out, so I went deeper. I accessed the county's property database, typed in the parcel number listed in one of the documents, and waited. And that's when it happened. The lake wasn't owned by the HOA, not even partially. It was private land, separate from the community's jurisdiction. According to county records, it had been inherited by a family that had since moved out of state. The taxes were still being paid, but there was a note. Available for private sale. Contact county office for details. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Karen had fined me for fishing on property the HOA didn't even control. She acted like she owned it, enforced rules over it, and used it as a weapon to shame residents, all based on a false claim of authority. I couldn't believe it. All this time, everyone just assumed the HOA ran the lake. They mowed around it, posted a few signs, and acted like it was theirs. But legally, it wasn't. And the real kicker? It was for sale. I sat there stunned. The idea came slowly, almost playfully at first. What if I bought it? What if I took the very thing they used against me and turned it into something they couldn't touch? I wasn't sure if I was being ridiculous or brilliant. But in that moment, the balance of power shifted. I had a plan, and I was ready to act on it. I didn't tell anyone at first, not my neighbors, not my friends, not even my wife. I wanted to be sure it was real before I said it out loud. I contacted the county office the next morning and got the number of the family listed as the owners of the lake property. The man I spoke to was the son of the original owner, now living several states away. He sounded surprised anyone was even interested in the land. Said it had been more of a hassle than anything else, just a patch of water nobody really used, always needing maintenance, always causing paperwork. I asked if he was open to selling. He said yes, almost immediately. We negotiated over a few calls. He was fair. I had to move some things around, pull from savings, even sell off a few investments. But I wasn't just buying a lake. I was buying peace of mind. I was buying the ability to say no to people who had never heard it. I got a lawyer to make sure everything was airtight. The deed was reviewed, signed, notarized, and filed within 3 weeks. Just like that, it was mine. All of it. The water, the shoreline, everything that bordered the neighborhood's edge. The very place Karen had tried to control was now legally outside her reach. I remember the day I got the official paperwork in the mail. I held it in my hands for a long time, smiling like an idiot. I walked out to the lake, stood where Karen had yelled at me just weeks before, and looked out at the water. It didn't feel like revenge, not yet. It felt like taking back something that had been stolen, my peace, my freedom, my right to enjoy a moment without being harassed. That night, I drafted a letter. Short, simple, direct. I notified the HOA that as the new legal owner of the lake property, access would now be restricted to authorized guests only. HOA members and residents were no longer permitted to use or enter the lake for any recreational purpose. I enclosed a copy of the deed and highlighted the boundaries in case there was any confusion. And then I mailed it, 1 copy to the board, 1 to Karen's house. I could only imagine the expression on her face when she read it. It was a bright Saturday morning when I finally did it. I had the signs custom made, bold, weather-resistant, and impossible to ignore. The first one read, "Private property, no trespassing, access by owner permission only." In smaller print below, it clarified, "This lake is no longer under HOA jurisdiction." I installed it right at the entrance to the trail leading to the lake, where every dog walker, jogger, and nosy neighbor would see it. The moment the sign stood upright in the ground, bolted to a sturdy wooden post, I stepped back and smiled. It wasn't about being petty. It was about drawing a line no one could twist or argue around. I placed 2 more signs along the perimeter, just in case someone wanted to accidentally wander down. They stood like sentinels guarding my peace, like silent reminders that the game had changed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The metal signs said everything. The neighborhood buzz started almost instantly. People slowed their walks to read them. Phones came out for pictures. Whispers traveled fast. Within an hour, I spotted Karen storming toward the lake from across the greenbelt. Phone pressed to her ear, her pace sharp and furious. She stopped dead in front of the sign, read it again, and then stared out at the water as if trying to will it back into her control. But it was done. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I was already back on my porch, sipping coffee and watching her from a distance. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm that couldn't be touched. The lake was mine. The rules were mine. And there was nothing she could do about it. Karen did not take the news well. Within 24 hours of the signs going up, she was knocking on doors, rallying residents, and demanding an emergency HOA meeting. She called it a crisis, as if the lake had been stolen in the dead of night. Flyers were taped to mailboxes, warning of unauthorized changes to community access. She spun it like I had betrayed the neighborhood, like I was some rogue villain who had taken something sacred. But the more she pushed, the more the cracks began to show. At the emergency meeting, her voice trembled with anger as she tried to explain how this could have happened. She blamed the board for not updating the records, accused the county of misfiling property lines, even hinted that I must have tricked someone into the sale. But none of it held up. I had the deed. I had the law, and I had the receipts. One by one, residents began questioning her. Why did she find someone over a lake the HOA didn't own? Why was she enforcing rules that never existed? Why hadn't the board verified ownership before issuing penalties? The questions kept coming, and for once, Karen didn't have answers, just deflections and anger. Her authority began to crumble right there under the weight of her own overreach. Some of the board members, clearly tired of her drama, started backing away. The president called for a vote of confidence. It didn't go her way. By the end of the week, Karen had voluntarily stepped down, though everyone knew it wasn't really a choice. The HOA scrambled to regain control of its image, issuing a quiet apology letter to residents. But the damage was done. The Queen had fallen, and the lake, the symbol of her power, was forever out of her reach. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, calmer. Karen's absence was almost eerie at first, like the sudden silence after a thunderstorm. No more confrontational notes on doors, no more unannounced inspections, or passive-aggressive community emails. For the first time since moving in, people actually started waving when they walked past my house. A few even came by to say they were sorry for not speaking up sooner, admitting they too had been targets of Karen's rulebook tyranny, but were too afraid to challenge her. Funny how quickly people find their voices when fear loses its grip. The HOA, now under fresh leadership, kept a much lower profile. Meetings were shorter, less heated. The tone had shifted from control to cooperation. There were even whispers about revising the bylaws to prevent any one member from holding too much influence again. It was subtle, but it was progress. I didn't go to every meeting, but when I did, I was treated with a kind of respect that hadn't existed before, like the guy who stood up, took a hit, and somehow came out the other side with his dignity and the lake intact. As for the lake, it became my sanctuary. I built a small dock on the side closest to my property, added a bench, and spent many mornings and evenings just sitting there, fishing with my son, or simply watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about finally having the freedom to enjoy something without looking over my shoulder. I allowed a few close neighbors to visit, especially the ones who had always been kind. But the days of entitlement were over. Karen moved out not long after her resignation. Whether she was embarrassed, bitter, or simply couldn't handle the loss of control, no one really knew. Her house went up for sale quietly, and a new family moved in. They smiled, they waved, they seemed normal. And me? I still fish. Not out of spite, not to make a point, but because I love it. Because it brings peace. And because sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about reclaiming what was yours all along, and enjoying it like they never existed in the first place. Sometimes, standing your ground means more than just saying no. It means refusing to let someone else define your peace. I didn't plan on buying a lake or turning a neighborhood upside down. I just wanted to fish with my son. But when petty power tries to control what should be simple and good, you have two choices: back down or rise up. I chose the latter. And in doing so, I didn't just get justice. I got clarity, calm, and a view worth every penny. If you're ever pushed too far, remember this: you're allowed to push back, and you just might win.